go over at a high level some of the information we covered. And then I had a chart that I think was a little confusing last time that I hopefully made a little less confusing this time. So highlights from the last workshop, just kind of at a macro level of our shared understanding of what staff have put together in the fiscal plan that we're asking for your feedback on for the next 5 years of budgeting, are things like, we're assuming we're remaining under the state's levy limit cap, but not necessarily much more than that. We don't really have a target for how much cushion we're leaving underneath that. In fact, we're assuming at this point we're not leaving a lot of cushion. We do have a target not to exceed 4% net levy increase. Now remember, again, that net levy increase is taking into account growth in the community, which we're estimating in that third bullet point then at 1.5% net new construction. So the total levy increase may actually be higher than that number, but when you take into account net new construction and the increase to the assessed value of the community, that net result is actually a little bit lower. And then in the fiscal plan, our target is to not exceed a 4% net levy increase. The plan also includes an addition of 1 FTE over 5 years, and that FTE is being added in 2028. So right now, we've been at 119.8 FTEs. We're currently at 116.8, and then the plan includes an addition of 1 FTE in 4 out of the 5 years of the plan to get us to a point of 120.8, which is more higher than what we had going into this year. And then, again, just a reminder, this particular plan contemplates development, particularly in our tax increment districts, as being critical to the future budget assumptions that we have. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So the main purpose of the workshop, as a reminder, is just to check in with you all regarding our macro assumptions. I just went over a number of those. So things like the levy targets, the allocations between the general fund, library, capital funds, debt service funds. How we allocate that levy is one of the assumptions we want to check in with you all about. Staffing levels, which I just discussed, and then kind of discuss the reliance on development that's in this fiscal plan. But keep in mind that the fiscal plan does just set a framework for future budget decisions. So we'll be revisiting assumptions every time we prepare a budget. So again, right now we're assuming things like 1.5% net new construction. Last year we were at 4.14%, and this year we're at 2.68%. So just to give you context for what the last 2 years are, if we were to go into our 2025 budget and have 2% net new construction when we've assumed 1.5, those are the sorts of updates that we anticipate coming back to you all with in future budgets. Our fiscal plan contemplated X. We've actually experienced Y, and here's what that means for what we're able to do or not do in the budget relative to the fiscal plan that was originally presented to you. So then again, that budget to fiscal plan comparison is often a point of emphasis in our budget discussions. So this is the chart then that I think caused a little bit of confusion last time. And I've got 1 or 2 more ahead of this yet to try to bring a little bit more clarity to it. But the annual change in terms of percentage in our general fund expenses in 2024 through 28, which is the fiscal plan, and then I also included some historical context for comparison. You can see that we're at basically 6% in 2024 for an anticipated change in our general fund budget. That then drops to less than 0.5%, so it's pretty flat. It stays below 1% in 26, and then it pops back up. So I'm going to move to another slide that presents this a little bit differently. And in this case, you can see what, in terms of dollar amounts on the left side there, what we're anticipating our general fund budget to be, and then I just put those percentages above that. So to get from 2023 to 24, you can see that 6% increase. You can see where it remains relatively flat in 25 and 26, and then it kind of bends back up in 27 and 28. Now, that jump in 2024 is largely due to the cash financing for capital projects that we've discussed. So the fire department station design and a portion of the police department roof in 2024, as well as this levy portion of financing of fire department portable radios That's a project that was identified in the capital improvement plan with general fund dollars being a specifically enumerated funding source in there. There's also state grant dollars. I believe Rural Fire Association participation was included in the CIP as well. So this is just that general fund portion. But you can see with the cash financing, especially that $540,000, what that does. That's represented in the yellow bar on that top right chart there. If you were to actually remove those, which is this bottom right-hand chart, you can see that the general fund budgeted expenses would be a much more gradual increase. So going back to this last chart, then that's why you see that 6% is such a big jump. It's really due to the cash financing from capital projects there. So then I wanted to discuss the component parts of our general fund revenues. And I think kind of going back to that highlight slide, when we talk about development being a large contributor to the way we're able to build assumptions in our fiscal plan, I wanted to discuss that here. So what I've done is I've taken our property taxes, our transfers from tax increment districts, and our licenses and permits revenue, which a major percentage of those are building permit related revenues. And I've categorized those as what I'm calling growth-based revenues. So essentially, growth-based revenues rely on a combination of commercial and residential growth and retention. And you can see how much of the general fund revenues over the next 5 years are comprised of, again, what I'm labeling as growth-based revenues. So the orange is intergovernmental. If you were to compare 2024, that orange layer, to the prior year, 2023, you'd see a bit of a jump there because of the supplemental shared revenues. But then we're assuming it remains relatively flat. The state already provided guidance, like I mentioned in the last workshop, of a 2.3% increase, but then we're just assuming it's flat. Same with our transfers from other funds. We do include in the plan an assumption of a 2% increase per year. But you can see in the grand scheme of things, kind of from this layer cake view, you're not seeing an increase in the width of that row. So really what it comes down to is an emphasis or a reliance even on those growth-based revenues, such as property taxes. And the reason I labeled that as growth-based is because our ability to levy taxes is largely dependent on net new construction, which is a measure of growth. And to some extent as well, our general obligation debt that's revenue backed, which we're typically, like as in the case of this year, issuing in instances where we've got some development reason to do so, like Main Valley Corporate Park. So that's why I've labeled property taxes as being growth-based. TID transfers, obviously a growth-based revenue. Growth in the TIDs enables the TIDs to make transfers to the general fund. And then again, building permits is such a large share of the licenses and permits revenue. I've got that there as well. So,
John, what kind of percentage of the blue taxes and transfers and that? What would you break that up? What percentage of property taxes and round numbers? I know you don't have exact right here. And then the license and permits, is that the wheel license and so forth? Or?
So that's actually like the vehicle registration fee I've got within charges for services technically.
Okay.
And then I would say the property taxes, the TID transfers, the licenses and permits we're ballparking here very roughly, but 45 to 50% of total revenues. And by the end of the fiscal plan, it's going to be higher than that.
Yeah, but I'm saying of the blue, what percentage is property taxes of the blue?
Yep, let me do some quick.
Yep.
It's probably 80 to 90% of that total.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So it's not significant, Josh, but what's in other taxes in the ink?
So that's housing authority payment in lieu of taxes and mobile home taxes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. In fact, I should have mentioned that, but so yeah, again, I guess the picture I was trying to paint with this slide is just the reliance on those growth-based revenues moving forward. We're not going to see large increases from those other sources in the fiscal plan to try to continue to make balanced budgets. So I wanted to restate that general fund balance chart again. There really aren't any new conclusions in this one, but again, just because it's a recap of the first workshop. We are estimating, we're forecasting, projecting, whatever you want to call it, that we're going to stay above 50% unassigned fund balance over the next 5 years. You can see though that after 2026, it starts to taper back toward 50%. And the reason for that is twofold. In 2027, we do currently anticipate, now this is of course subject to change because we're still several years out from this, but we anticipate a $200,000 advance to TID number 10 for boulevard trees in the Sterling Ponds Corporate Park. That would go along with street lighting that's in that particular TID's project plan. That would be an expense of ultimately of the electric utility. Eventually tax increment revenue would cover it, but we would anticipate the need for an advance from the general fund for the boulevard trees portion of that future project. And then the reason it kind of stays relatively flat is because your unassigned fund balance is ultimately expressed as a percentage of your subsequent year's budget. So if the growth in your budget is increasing at a rate that's larger than your unassigned fund balance, you're actually going to see that unassigned fund balance represent a smaller percentage of your subsequent year's budget. So we're not saying that we're going to draw fund balance down. In fact, we're likely staying at least level, if not adding to it, because we have TIDs that are repaying old advances. It's just that the subsequent year's budget against which that number is measured is likely growing at a larger rate than the unassigned fund balance would be. So then let's talk net levy. And put it into the context of cash financing projects and what it would look like if we don't do that in 2024 and 2025. So kind of the top row underneath scenario there, that first column where it says current, if you just go from left to right, you can see what our new levy changes for each of those years. So it's 2% in 2024, but you can see that in any case, we don't exceed that 4% target that I mentioned earlier. So
That's
this
year to year, right?
Year to year, correct. And so this is because staff assumes, and this is, I've got on the bottom right hand there, this is pause for an assumption check with you all here, but we assume that your preference as council is to maintain smaller but predictable growth in levy, capped at 4% net levy increase, and to cash finance projects when we're able, in lieu of borrowing that would be levy back. So in the case of a fire station design, a police roof, those particular general obligation borrowings, because of how the state's levy limit is structured formulaically, that's debt that we're not able to capture for levy limit purposes. We're levying that money and it's paying off the debt service. The state doesn't, in effect, give you credit for that type of general obligation debt. So that's the type of debt that, I guess in staff's view, there's really not a lot of benefit to having that on the books if we could just cash finance instead. So given that we've got this addition of state supplemental shared revenue coming in, we thought that that would be a good time to go ahead and target some of this kind of undesirable general obligation debt. It's weird that I'm using that term, but we thought we'd go ahead and target debt like that with this supplemental shared revenue. But you can see on the bottom row there what future net levy increases would look like if we didn't do that. So what would happen if we still receive $533,000 in supplemental shared revenue, but we don't cash finance anything? The offset in that case would be we would just reduce the levy because we still need to produce a balanced budget. So you've got $533,000 in additional revenue. We haven't identified a one-time expense. We reduce levy. We could actually have a 5% decrease in levy in 2024, but we're still playing catch up over the duration of the fiscal plan. So you would see a 6.7% increase then for 2025 in terms of what the amount of levy that would be needed to produce a balanced budget. It would increase to 8.2% in 26. Then you can see it levels back off. But essentially what I'm trying to show here is we understand your preference is to maintain the smaller predictable growth with the cap and to cash finance projects in lieu of the levy backed borrowing, which is what we believe we're accomplishing in the plan that's reflected in that top row that says current.
Question for you, Josh. Could some of that funding be used to stabilize the library's expenses since they've lost some of their revenue over a considerable period of time? Because theoretically, if you did it correctly, it would keep the budget where they're talking and keep those critical services people grown to expect.
So I think the challenge we're ultimately going to run into is with regard to that levy limit. So we only have about 100,000, and I think I have a slide that'll show that maybe a little more clearly, but by the end of this fiscal plan, we're estimating that we've got about $100,000 in levy capacity under the state's levy limit formula. So tiny. So to the extent that we try to, I guess, accommodate what we need to accommodate and, I guess, allocate more levy to the library, we'll reach the point where, because we really only have $100,000 that we're working with, and then we'll be over our cap, it starts to be a question of priority. So certainly the council could make it a policy decision to find ways to get more levy allocation to the library. I guess what I'm sort of sharing from having been in these spreadsheets for a while now is we would just simply arrive at a point where it starts to become a question of priority. Are we essentially allocating more to the library by reducing general fund and then figuring out what those ripple effects would be? Is it less capital, potentially less debt service, however that may be? And so it starts to become a question of that. It's not so much that we couldn't utilize this as an opportunity set. We're still going to be running into that levy limit at some point.
So it's a game of balancing, and was what you're saying, that yes, we could, but we have to figure out how we want to balance it as a group.
Yep.
It would have negative impacts. Likely would have negative impacts on your levy limit capacity going forward. And it would be using a one-time increase in revenue to try to pay for a long-term operating deficit. So you don't, like, if there was a expense at the library that you wanted to pay cash for, like one of the projects on the list, that would put you in better shape than if you're just paying it for operating and personal expenses.
However, we could use it as a stopgap measure. We do it for one time, and then we figure out how we want to balance that to the next budget if we wanted to. Correct.
But it would ripple.
The council
We would have to reconfigure it. Yeah,
always has the opportunity to put money in the short term or long term where they want. So I think that's a policy option available to you. It's one that would likely have would make it more difficult to solve long term. I'm not sure it would help, but it could certainly be a stopgap.
Yeah. I think it'd be wise to find some type of agreement or consensus with the council, how we could stabilize some of that.
Could we look at, is there any impact to levy if we just stop asking the library to pay $200,000 a year in fees to the city?
Yes.
It would still have impact on the levy.
Yes. What that would look like is less revenue coming into the general fund that we would then have to make up in the form of levy being allocated to the general fund.
Or find a corresponding expenditure reduction in the general.
Yes. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
What is the projected cost for the FTE for staff over 2020 to go from 117 to 120? What is the cost for that over the 4 years?
They're just adding one, right?
Well, no, they're at 117, but they were at 118 plus, and then they want to go to 120. So it would be.
Yeah, I think we're assuming about, I don't remember what the assumptions we baked in were. It's going to be about $120,000 per position.
Okay.
And that would be wages plus benefits.
Yeah.
Figure about $26,000. We have to assume like a family plan.
Yeah.
Because we don't know what that theoretical employees will actually take.
That over 5 years is just the one position. Correct. We're making reductions in positions in the front years in order to get the one more FTE. So if you wanted to fund more positions wherever the library places, then you probably would have to, our recommendation would need to be to reduce positions in 24 somewhere else in the general fund in order to free up that money for the 5 years. So, but it's, that again is a policy decision the council can make. The challenge on the general fund positions is it's a lot more limited than our full FTE because we have so many positions funded by utilities that, you know, I wouldn't advocate it, but even, you know, like getting rid of this doesn't free up the money for the general fund. It frees up some money for the general fund because that position is allocated out. The positions that are primarily general funded would be public works and police, and then to some degree ComDev, although indirectly ComDev is being funded with permits and licenses. So, but there's probably, you can already make an argument that some of those positions would be general, and then the clerk, you know, your elections functions is all general, but I don't see any.
I don't want her to leave.
I do not see any opportunity. Well, it's not just the clerk. I mean, it's the clerk's office.
But also we don't want them to.
But you can't run elections without the staffing that we have. So that's just the challenge of, and that's why some of these targets were set. I think you're going to talk a little bit more about that assumption though. So one of the things that would be, if I can be so bold to say, we really should check this macro first.
But I do agree with Sean. I think the council has to come to some sort of consensus about this before we implement any, you know, like, I think there is some concern about the library's health and future with the current funding system that we have. So I think at some point we should have a discussion about that.
So we agree.
Okay. Awesome.
I think we first need to know unless you want to do a stopgap, which is a possibility, I guess we're suggesting to you that library thing is not directly related to this macro assumption that probably should come first, which is, are you okay with a bigger increase, even the 2% increase in 2024, to try to keep some level increases across the 5 years? Or does the council want us to assume, no, we're going to take advantage of that growth now. We're not going to, we would like to have a reduction or a 0% increase, and we'll trade that for having bigger increases in the future. We have not heard that in any conversations we've had, but it is a really critical assumption to check that top line is what you want to go forward with as your base assumption for the fiscal plan.
So if we're talking about this in terms of household finance, because I think that most people understand this, what you're asking is, are we okay with going forward with paying out of pocket for costs we can afford that don't harm the current levy scenario? So like if we can pay for cash for something instead of borrowing, we would rather pay for cash if we can afford it without hurting the bottom line.
Yeah, we're specifically talking about 2 specific cash purchases that we think make sense because of the way they impact, or the fact that they don't impact negatively the levy. We wouldn't recommend this for all cash purchases because some of them are going to hurt us more than help us. And then it's that whole idea of, from a family household comparison, if the bank told you that you could reduce your mortgage payment by $5 for the rest of this year, but next year you're going to pay $15 more.
Okay.
Would you rather do that, or would you rather have a $7.50 increase each year for the next 5 years? That's the closest analogy I can give you for household finances. Is you probably could give yourself and we can give ourselves and the community some relief if you wanted to. But it isn't, but it isn't gonna be a built-in relief forever. It's something we would, given our projections for where the spending is going and what your priorities are, it would be short-lived, and we think we heard from you in the past. We'd rather take a little bit more. And we have the fortunate case that growth was so good that the impact to the taxpayer, we're not asking to go to 3.99, even though we know your target is 4, because we think that 2% is enough to get us where we need to go, keeping in mind where we're headed.
But this also, just make sure I'm on the right page, net levy assumes only a 1.5% growth rate. So if we experience, I don't know what our history's been, but it's been 2 or better, as long as I can remember, we could be at 3.2 instead of 3.7. We could be at 3.31.
Yeah.
I mean, we could see some better there. I think the other thing that I am very cognizant of, and I keep in mind as I talk to people about this, is that we represent 25% of the tax bill.
No, we're like 30.
Oh, with increment, we're 29 or something like that. Okay. There's other taxing authorities here that are doing things that are going to impact the tax bill. We get the blame for the whole bill.
Oh, yeah.
That's not true, but when you sit down with people, you explain it to them. But the perception is this. In my mind, we need to be cognizant of even our increase as it impacts the total picture. School district has already telegraphed us they're going to do a referendum. They want an operating referendum. That's going to have a big impact to the citizens. So I'm not saying we have to be, paupers here, but I also am concerned about sending the message that, well, they're going to their max and we're going to the max and everything else. I don't think that's where we're headed, and I hope that's not the mentality that we end up with.
So are you looking for a vote?
I guess
With
we,
nodding heads,
I guess if there's a big objection, we'd have to know it now. But otherwise, this is the recipe. This is what's baked into the cake.
I like door number 1.
Okay, so let's move on to the next one.
So we're going to talk general obligation debt. So these are the changes that are in the fiscal plan compared to what you would have seen in the 2024 through 2028 CIP. So where I've highlighted in yellow, that's where we've made some changes. So fire station design would have been on this list. We're 0 now because we're assuming that cash financing that we just discussed. Same can be said with police roof. And then fire station construction is now a borrow that's been shifted from 7.1 million down to 4.1 million. So the project itself, the construction piece, is $5.5 million. And then we're still assuming a $1.4 million federal appropriation for that, which leaves us with the balance of 4.1 that we're assuming is a borrow in 2026, likely in the form of a 15 or a 20-year general obligation bond to be determined when we get to that point. So that's just to point out what's changed and is also included then in this fiscal plan. So this chart shows the general obligation debt service, how much we're paying per year, and the layers, how it's constructed. Now I've circled a piece there that I'm going to come back to in a couple slides when we talk levy limits. But you can see that the gray and the yellow, which are the bottom two rows, that's your utility or TID-backed general obligation debt and your other revenue-backed general obligation debt, such as an agreement that we may reach with the Rural Fire Association to pay some portion of future debt service on a fire station. That would be the layer of debt that, going back to the state, how they construct levy limits, that would be the portion of general obligation debt service that we essentially get credited for in our levy limit calculation. Everything above that, the levy-backed GO, And then there's actually some general obligation debt that is just directly charged in the general fund. That's essentially also levy backed. That debt doesn't help us for levy limit purposes. There is no other funding source for that GO, that general obligation debt service. You levy it, you pay it with what you levied. This is just simply to show you if these assumptions were to change and either the gray or the yellow were to drop in any of those out years, there's likely going to be a negative ripple effect onto our levy limit calculation and how much we're able to levy to make our entire budget work. Everybody that gets a piece of the tax levy would be negatively affected by that. Now again, this does assume some amount of Rural Fire Association funding for the future fire station project. As I mentioned on this slide, we would see that borrowing occur in 26. The debt service begins in 27, but then that some amount of payment from them would come online in that same year. So that's why you see that row grow. And this is all what's currently baked into the fiscal plan then as well. This is how we arrived at a balanced tentative fiscal plan.
So that would be a good yield spot too.
Sure.
So on your behalf, Councilmember Morissette's been attending Rural Fire. I've had some conversation with him and also with the mayor about what our targets are for participation by Rural Fire. So we are making assumptions in the fiscal plan that Rural Fire is going to continue to pay 35% of the operations and capital department. That's our position with the rural, is that if you want to continue the partnership, we appreciate it. We think it makes sense, and 35% still works for us. And that we are expecting you to essentially pay 35% of the capital, or whatever the station cost is. The project was reduced in cost, both because of feedback that they provided about their ability to come up with payments, and our fiscal plan and the levy limit. Levy limit had a lot to do with it, what we can squeeze out in 15 years for debt service on the fire station. So the project's been reduced. We've given them our position. There's a strong majority on the Town of Troy is not particularly cooperative in any of these discussions. So you've all experienced that before. But the other towns are very pleased with what's going on, like the way things are going, and expect that that's the way that the agreement is going to fall. They're willing to do it essentially in a 10-year period. It's about $200,000 a year for them to come up with for just the capital portion on top.
Each township or
Collectively.
Are they gonna collect this in fees, or is this gonna be like a baseline type of tax?
We are not getting involved in how they collect the money for their portion, so that's their responsibility. So I guess I just want to check with the council to make sure that that's still an assumption that makes sense to you. We haven't asked them to pay more, a greater percentage. We haven't asked them to pay less. We're not willing to accept less, and then we are saying it's 35% of the total project. We are not crediting them with grant money that we may get, or we're saying 35% of the total project is what we expect you to come up with. So that's what's baked into the fiscal plan right now.
No, is 35% the percentage they're paying now?
Correct.
Do you have similar scenarios in other cities like ours where the neighboring areas pay 35%?
Yeah, our agreement with Rural Fire is similar, but almost all of them have some unique formulaic changes in them, but a third or half or 40% is pretty common. We have a 3-factor calculation. It's population, fire calls, and equalized value. That's very common formula to do, and then it's all weighted, so it's 40%, 40%, and 20%. So we're basically proposing the same contract go forward. if we did recalculate, and the rural parts of our fire service actually would pay, if we went strictly by the formula, they would pay more than 35%. They might pay 39%, 38%, but we didn't see, as a city's negotiating team, we didn't see a lot of benefit to try and squeeze another 1 or 2 or 3% out, because the formula, it's about a 1/3, 2/3 arrangement.
Other person, Marcel, what's your take?
Well, I think Scott's portrayal is good. That's what's happening. But when I go into those meetings, what I always have to think about is that we're not negotiating with any one town. We're negotiating with an entity who's represented, and not all of the towns, I don't think, have a representative on here, do they?
They do.
One
was missing.
Okay, one was missing. So they've each got representation, but for instance, Town of Troy wants to reset their boundary. Well, reset it. That's up to you. This group has to figure out how they're gonna pay for the 35%. It's not us going, well, okay, then we need to reduce this. We have got a set expense for the 35% that we built our model for, and they gotta pay the 35%, and they know that. But if they reduce the boundary, this group has gotta redistribute their portion across there, and they don't wanna do that. I think there were some good discussions about the grant, about the $1.4 million. They wanted us to take that off the top to begin with, and then go to the 65-35. And we said, well, we're obligating ourselves to interest and exposure from a mortgage or from a bonding and so forth. You want us to shape that? It probably looks the same as it does if we just, include the $1.4 million. And they got past that. They were fine with it. They realized that it's us that's taking a lot more of the risk. 90% of the representatives really appreciate the relationship. There's good communication. There's good discussions with Chief Cash and Assistant Chief Moody and Foley, and so it's a good relationship.
They can't drag Troy along.
Troy's essentially got no choice.
Right.
To me, it sounds like maybe they need an incentive, some type of incentive here to join. And I think if you look at the way a lot of these partnerships are structured, if you join later, there's probably a higher fee. And what that looks like,
I think their meeting in October, they want to look at the new contract. We've agreed not to come to that meeting. They did not want to have a closed session. A couple of the members felt that they didn't like negotiating in closed session. So we said, fine, we just won't come. You guys work your deal. But it was good to see that they want a copy of the existing agreement, and then they'll redline it with any changes, and they'll come back to us to negotiate the new contract for, I think we were talking about, was it 7 years, Scott? Or are we gonna match it to 10 to the term of the debt?
Yeah, I think we still have to negotiate that.
We gotta negotiate.
Current contract is 5.22, so it's like a 9-year contract. I think that. So I know you haven't been presented with a big memo or anything.
Yeah.
I just wanted to generally understand that there wasn't the anticipation by this body that we're going out and getting some significant change in our relationship with the town, with the rural association, that basically we're baking in the status quo. Because that does matter. I mean, it changes levy limit calculations. It changes a lot of stuff. So we first wanted to know, okay, little over time, that sounds good. That sounds consistent with what you want. The next thing would be, you're okay continuing our partnership with the rural fire essentially the way it is. And then we're finding a way in here to pay our 65% then in the fiscal plan. And we couldn't find a way to pay 65% of a $9 million project. It's the levy limit is, you hit the levy limit no matter what kind of tricks and tips and things we try to stretch around. It's just too much debt for us to take on and feel like we're not putting ourselves in really bad shape, like in 2035 or 2034.
And every indication that's come out of there, from my point of view, personal point of view, is that they are in tacit agreement with what we've proposed to them. And they're gonna come back. There might be a tweak here or there, but I don't expect some, yeah, we wanna pay 30%, yeah.
Well, I don't know if you got that impression. I mean, some of them are actually anxious. Like, they would just like to
Yeah.
get it done.
Yeah.
Like, let's sign it. It's a great deal for us.
Yeah.
We love the fire department.
Yeah.
The city's been good to us. Let's
In
move
fact,
on.
they moved their negotiating meeting back to like October 18th versus it should have been in November. So, like, oh, no, let's just get it. So,
I know we still have a year left on. It's not expiring in December. They just assume, like, we are doing fiscal planning and say, all right, they want a longer runway too to figure out where they'll come up with this money. So that's good. I think that helps me with the assumption. So we will continue to assume a pretty significant chunk of money from them coming in to pay this debt service.
So then jumping into levy, this is the estimated levy capacity by year then. So I mentioned we've got about $100,000 at the end of this fiscal plan. Now, it ends up being a cumulative effect. So if we were to take a bigger bite, so you see there's quite a bit more capacity there in 24. If we were to go ahead and take a bigger bite out of that in 2024, that actually ends up rippling across the other years because of how the levy formula works. The years build on each other cumulatively. So you wouldn't just take a big bite out of 24 and then see the same amount left in those out years. That would essentially be gone in the out years then too. And just to emphasize, you can see that between 26 and 28, you see a little increase there to the capacity in 27. And I said I was gonna come back to where I circled that there. You can just see the effect of where we had a little bit more of that revenue back general obligation debt in 27 there because of the Rural Fire Association payments. You can see what that does to our levy capacity in that particular year. So if there were to be changes to any of those assumptions about revenue back GO, and as Scott mentioned, it has that ripple effect on our levy limit, that's where you're going to see less of that orange capacity available there. So whenever we're talking about these things, there's usually three things we're looking at. There's what did we just do to our levy capacity? What did we do to our general obligation indebtedness limit? Because that would have been affected also by discussions about a $9 million borrow or a $4.1 million borrow. And then the third, of course, is that net levy increase. So those are the three main levers as we make some changes in here. Those are the first three things I'm looking at. What did we just do to this? What did we do to our general obligation indebtedness limit? And what did we do to our assumption about a cap of 4% net levy increase from one year to the next? And if any of those three things are not looking good, then we're back to the drawing board. And that's the iterative process of how we got here. So
the assumption check is, sorry, I know they want to have discussions.
Yep.
Assumption check here is that the council is not asking us to tax to the absolute max.
Correct.
Right.
And you also don't have a particular need for us to get all of the levy capacity immediately. That it makes sense for us to take it. If we took a bunch of it in 2024, you basically couldn't increase the levy going forward. You'd have a flat levy. That's an important assumption. So we have heard, I think, that's what you want to do is we don't want to spend everything today so that we don't have any flexibility in the out years. Right? That there's nothing about 2024 that we just need to put all our cards in and spend whatever it takes and get it done. Okay.
That's right.
All right.
Okay. So then there's another assumption check on this slide too. These are the current levy allocation targets in the top. Now these are just carryovers from the 2020 through 2022 through 2026 fiscal plan. And then the bottom there is what, I guess I call it proposed, but it's really what is in the fiscal plan as of 2028. So when we balanced everything out, we checked all those levers I just described. We made sure that those 3 boxes were all checked. We didn't run into trouble with any of those things. This is the levy allocation that we landed on. So general fund compared to the current fiscal plan, we'd be moving from 60% allocation to 74. Library stays the same at 10. And where you see the general fund gaining that 14% allocation is really from the debt service and capital categories. So going back to the CIP when we talked about cash financing with levy dollars, this is where that's coming into play again. You can see there's not a lot over the next 5 years of levy being used to cash finance capital projects. We do have supplemental shared revenue being used to cash finance capital projects, as I discussed earlier. So that's where you're seeing some of that debt service is actually lower than what it might otherwise be, because we're taking that one-time cash from supplemental shared revenue increase, applying it to fire station design, police roof, that would otherwise have been borrowed and levied for, and you'd see a larger number down there.
But Josh, the pie every year gets bigger.
Correct. So this is just
percentages change.
Yep.
What is, sorry, I just want to make a clarification to make sure I'm reading it right too. Where's our 600,000 for roads?
That's in general fund.
Okay, so we've talked about this asterisk before. A lot of cities borrow for their annual street maintenance. We don't, so it's in the general fund. So that's not a warning, a caution, or anything. It's just so you know why aren't we spending more on construction? Well, general fund includes a bunch of construction dollars. So
It would be helpful, if possible, to even break the general fund, leave it the same color, but do, public safety, utility and street maintenance. If you could cut the green pie into, so we understand what the other major departments are doing, that might be a helpful.
and this is just levy.
No, I understand.
So do you want an expense pie, or do you want just a levy pie? Or do you want both?
Both, yeah.
I mean,
2 pies, 1 blueberry, 1 apple.
because we're not levying for utilities, right? So
Oh, yeah,
a huge percentage of our expenditures don't have any levy.
right.
This is just what we're spending our levy. So that's,
I think now that you say it, I think just the levy's fine. I think if we see that broken, I don't know how much work that is, Josh. I don't mean that.
and I'll say it again, I've said it at maybe every workshop we've had, at least once every other year. There is absolutely no magic to the targets. There isn't a guide from GFOA. There isn't a city manager handbook that says this is what the targets are. There isn't. We set targets as a policy guide rail so that we can try to end up where we want to end up. So that is the purpose of these targets. There isn't any magic to it. As we were talking about what city council wanted to spend their money on, particularly the levy, these were what we came up with. And we haven't hit those targets. The 60, 10, 20, and 10, we haven't hit. Right, and then we always have this guide rails, and there's always stuff up and down.
How did you get to the 10% for the library? Why not 11?
That's up to the council. That's where the council set it. Yeah. At the time, there was a thought that the library had taken its turn and had a pretty big percentage of the levy, and that there was other priorities identified in the survey and things ahead that they wanted to shift some of that money to. And they're still at, I don't know what the 2023 percentages of levy.
I mean, I know if you take debt service out, they're the second highest behind the police department for levy. So to kind of go back to the pie.
Yeah. That 10% and that 10% are not equal. The pie is bigger in the lower one. So the dollar amount's bigger.
Yeah, real dollar, we've had increase in our levy every year. There's more. The 10% for library in those two pies is not the same dollar.
Right, so I mean, so I guess the check here, correct me if I'm wrong with this, but the check here is that you're in alignment with the percentage-based targets. Now, there are dollar numbers that make up those percentages. We're not necessarily asking, are you okay with the dollar amounts? Because that's going to be subject to so much change between now and 2028. But are you okay with this allocation? I think the number that comprises the 10% to the library is $940,000. They're at $867,000 in the 24-23 budget. I believe increasing to $900 for 24. So then this would be over 5 years an increase by another 40. But again, we're not asking, it's not the number, it's the allocation, it's the percentage. It's kind of the assumption.
And for me, I'm gonna say no. I would like to see the library percentage be between 11 and 12 because the real world is not staying flat in terms of costs and things like that. We're implementing a 9% increase in staff wages, which is expensive, and the library pays back roughly $190,000 a year in services. We're losing services at the library because we're cutting positions. And I think we're at a tipping point with the library. Our library is a gem and we should keep it as a gem. And I think encouraging families and community members to read and get free internet, get support with all of the things that people get support with at the library is critical to maintaining our gem of a city. And so I would propose that we look at increasing the library percentage. I don't want to have a situation where the library loses so much money that they have to go out for an operational levy. That would be not good. But I understand building levies and building funds. But I think having to raise money to keep the doors open would not be a good look.
But where do you propose we take the 2% from?
I don't care. That's not, I mean, it's the, yeah.
Well, hold on. So I think it's fair to state a policy objective and then say in this meeting, this is actually the point of the meeting, is not that we're experts and we have the answer right now. Because we don't. I don't sit with this budget every day. Rather, as a council, do we think that the 10%, which is valid, and I think the history here, if I can recap and jump off, is 10 years ago, 18%.
I think it was 22.
Yeah. So it's been a signal. So it's been
included.
Go ahead.
Service for the library.
Yeah.
So it was not 22% of the library providing operating support for wages and operating expenses. Just, I think that's a good point to not lose.
Yeah, and that's fair. And I think y'all know my quote about stats, right? Mark Twain says liars use stats and damn liars, right? So it's hard because we're all coming into this. I think the challenge here is that the library, from what I can see, has done a pretty significant shaving with having its book check system done electronically. We're 84% self-checkout. So if we get to 94% self-checkout, does that still avoid some form of cliff down the road? And I think it's a fair policy thing for us to say, here's the money, y'all have to figure it out. But I think the way in which we've understood how that money's being used maybe has not reflected operations entirely. Because I don't entirely feel comfortable with the story I was told about how the library got to where they are.
But I'm also willing to listen so that we understand what that means going forward. I believe the narrative that many on council had heard was that maybe the library was a little heavy. And because they're a little bit heavy, this had to take place. And this is a natural occurrence from that. And that might be fair. But when I looked at the library and I did some numbers and I did some checking, if you take stacks plus electronic plus visits and you create all these metrics, and then you take their FTE, which I think as of today is 8.5, so less than 9 full-time positions, they're doing more with less than they've ever done before. That's laudable. You'll all be shocked to know that if someone leaves my office, they don't instantly hire another person. Nick just gets to do it. So it's a normal thing for most of us in business. So it's good to see that the library has enhanced and went off of those best practices. I don't know if I'm comfortable saying they need 11%. I don't know if I'm landed there. I just would like a little bit more enumeration and understanding about how these numbers are set as targets, because we need to have targets. We need to have goals. I've said this publicly many times between finance and city administrator. We have a really sustainable model here. I don't think anyone's objective is to change that. It isn't to make us radically operate differently. But it would be hard for me to see how if we shave and we get to 11 or 11.5, how the sky is going to fall either. So at least that's where I'm coming from, and give you some broad thoughts that I have.
I think it's really healthy to not just look at it like a percent, but look at it as a dollar amount. This is what you're getting for this. This is what you're getting for that. So if you look at it a percent, you kind of lose focus of what it could be for the community and what it is for the community. So to your point, Nick.
So you will have some difficult decisions to make if you want to set targets in the 12% range. I mean, your likely result is less police and less public works. You don't have a significant amount of policy options. You could do less capital debt service potentially, not do the fire station. That could potentially free up enough. It'd be close. I mean, you could just not do a fire station for the next 10 years and you probably have it. And these are not, perhaps this isn't, I'm trying to give you tangible things that will be, what are the levers? And again, the 10%, however it was arrived at, or even if you want to call it an arbitrary target, that's fine. Doesn't bother me at all to say that was arbitrary target and quote it or put it in analysis or whatever. But what the city did in a thoughtful and specific way was say that we wanted more emphasis on parks and technology and communications and police. And that's where your investments went with those levy dollars. And the council always has the ability to readjust those priorities. So it was telegraphed, right? It wasn't a surprise. It wasn't a secret. We've had lots of public meetings about what the council has set as a policy, which is we burned the mortgage at the library, 3 cheers. Now let's get working on our parks. Let's get more police officers. That was a conscious decision by the policymakers that was carried out enthusiastically and specifically by your staff. And then that's what we have. Now here we are at this reflection point to figure that out.
The positions that we do contemplate adding back over the next 5 years of the fiscal plan, we had essentially based on, when I answered the question about costing earlier, the costing for those positions were based on either public works maintenance workers, plowing, streets maintenance, or police patrol. Mm-hmm. So to the extent that it would be a question of to allocate more, because we would essentially be looking for the positions that are going to be 100% backed by the levy. It gets trickier when you pull positions out that are split between multiple funds. So when we're talking about a conversation of reallocating levy, we'd be looking at those positions that are going to be 100% backed by the levy, which are going to be your streets, your parks, your police, your fire. And those are the positions that we're contemplating adding back over the next 5 years. So I think it's probably fair to say that's where we'd likely be looking, unless we were to come up with a solution on the revenue side, which would probably require conversations about getting less conservative than we are in the model right now. So
Well, and I'd like to ask a question because we actually don't get to do this because of how we're built as a council. We don't get to assumption check with each other without running into a lot of times some openly meeting stuff. So I guess I'm curious to know where my colleagues sit in terms of looking at this as a projection, just so we understand 10% or some level of, moving past 10%. With the understanding, I don't think anyone is saying shut down the fire station. I don't think that was a starting point for any of us. So.
No, and I don't, here's what I want to say that I want to be very clear about. I think the library is a gem. I think our police force is a gem. I think our fire department is a gem. I think we have the advantage of having a fantastic city. I understand that these are decisions that will have to be made, but I think I do not want to walk out of this meeting having someone say, okay, are you going to cut a firefighter? Are you going to cut a police officer? Because then that comes in that I'm anti-police, anti-firefighter. I don't appreciate that. What I'm saying is our library is a community resource, just like our firefighters, just like our police officers. But our library is currently having financial difficulties with the assumption that was made many councils ago, and we should look at that. I'm just throwing a number out there, and I honestly, to Sean's point, don't care if we do dollar or percentage. It doesn't matter to me. But I don't want this conversation to become, well, what are you going to do? Cut a firefighter? Cut a police? That's totally not what this is about. And that's how I felt when I first said that. So
I didn't intend for you to feel that way.
That's how I felt.
But the reality of it is it's got to come from someplace.
Absolutely, but I think
it's a street worker or wherever. We're gonna have to make that decision, that trade-off.
Absolutely, but I think
I never said you want to cut a policeman or a fireman.
And I
want to be clear about that.
I didn't say. I'm not looking at. I'm not
We're
specifically.
looking at me.
Well, I'm sorry. You're just kind of there.
Well,
you're sort of over there. I wasn't looking.
We've got to make some financial decisions that are not easy.
Yeah.
The library is a unique animal because we give it a budget. They spend it how they decide to spend it. We don't tell them, put 5 master librarians on in 2 pages. We say, here's your pot of money, spend it. It's a little difficult. I know they're in a difficult situation. I had the same conversation with them. I appreciate their passion. But the reality of it is we have to equally decide library, parks, utilities, streets, police, fire, clerk. We've got to decide how we're going to spend that money. And if you ask each of them individually, hey, do you want more money in your department? Josh, you want more money in finance? He's going to say, yeah, I'll take 2 more FTEs.
Actually, he said, I'll give you 2.
Well, all right, Josh is team player. But, it's not an easy situation to decide. And they can spend the money the way they need to spend it. Police we dictate to the police, you're going to get X number of cars, this is how you're going to spend it. Fire, same thing. Street workers, we tell them, this is how many trucks you're getting, this is how many people you're getting, this is what you're getting for summer help.
How can we best inform the council so that you can feel like you can make a decision about it? I mean, the percentage is a percentage, and it's a target, and it's something to think about and use as a tool. You've also got the gross amount of money. I don't mean it in a disgusting way, but the total amount of money that's going into different operations in the city that can be examined too. Ultimately, it may not boil down. Certainly, I don't think we don't expect us to have to put the council in this situation where if you say we want to spend more money in the library, we're going to say, well, then you have to tell us if you're willing to cut this position. We will make the recommendation. You should understand that that's the likely outcome is we have to adjust FTE and general fund because you can't. I don't know how you can pile more money into the library without it. That's the fiscal reality as I see it. So I want to understand how we can help you get information for you to decide whether or not you think the library is in fiscal stress. I'm not sure that as your advisor, I believe that's the case. I don't think they're in a case where we can't resolve their fiscal issues and still provide excellent library service. But you have advisors in the library board that seem to disagree with me. Their advice is equal or better than mine, if that's what you would like to take. So, but I don't know what we need to provide you as staff to help you decide if you think it's an issue or not. The fiscal plan does not, I'm not trying to work the percentage up in the fiscal plan. That's not what's presented to the council. That's not fundamental to our assumptions. Our assumptions is try to get at Parks and Public Works and police are the two areas where we think that service demand is much greater growth in that than the library. That's my advice to you is I don't believe the library service demand is growing anywhere near the rate at other areas of the city that are priorities to the community based on their survey results and feedback I've got from you. And that's how we put this together. We're going to plow 7 more miles of street, lane miles of street this winter. I mean, that's a direct and specific increase in responsibilities. The library services by most metrics are level at best, even with the growth in population and everything else. And that doesn't mean it's not important. It just means I'm trying to get your resources that we have we've talked about all these limitations on what the pie is and then what the service level demands are. And so that's where our advice, I don't know if it's ours, I'll make Josh say it's his. I think it is. Our advice is that we are in this 5-year fiscal plan. We are limiting growth and admin. In fact, we're reducing IT, HR, admin, because we think we've got the organization in a position where we've made those investments in HR and IT and communications that now can pay forward. So we can reduce the FTE and then go after the next areas of the organization that seem to need the effort. And we think direct service is where it's coming. I mean, more lane miles of street. We have more, we're going to have more park acreage, more stormwater acreage. Now on the utility side, we can cover most of that, right? It's through the utility rate. So I don't have to come up with, we have way more manholes. We have a lot more fire hydrants. We have all of that, but I've got the whole utility revenue stream and the general fund. You just don't, you've got a limited pot to do that. And we think police calls, they're also patrolling more lane miles. We've added more facilities and buildings. It certainly looks to me like your service demand growth is going to be in those areas, not necessarily the library, which has shrinking circulation of hard materials. That's understandable. They have rising circulation of electronic media. They're doing a great job of serving the public. They have limited resources too, but I think we'll have to find out what we can give you. What do you need? What does the council need to help you make an informed decision? Because it is purely a policy decision.
I think we need an itemized list of what a dollar amount and what a percent amount looks at for stabilizing what we have and what the difference between 0.5% more and 1% more would look if we were to go that direction and help it them.
And you have a proposal from the library, which is a good piece of information for you to have, right? They have said, this is what we want, and it's an extra 200,000 at least. And it's base building, which means it's gonna continue. So, if we're gonna do that, we probably need to grab that savings right away in order to think that we can project it out. Which means instead of just reducing the FTE that I've pulled out, mostly through attrition, we're gonna have to think about other tools.
And that was my question earlier about the paybacks or buybacks or how, I'm not exactly sure what you call it.
The allocations, yeah.
But when they pay the general fund for services like HR, maintenance,
Building maintenance.
I don't know what else it would be. So that in many communities of our size and demographic are, I would basically say, gifted as part of the community structure. That cost has increased over the years. Is there a way for us to decrease that expenditure without getting into a conversation about losing people. Does that make sense? Because from their PowerPoint, PowerPoint, it has increased pretty significantly over the last 5 years. It's been a couple weeks since I saw it.
Yes, the council asked us to make significant investments in IT, HR, culture, communications. Those are all things that were reflected in the allocations going up for all operations.
So if we gifted that, or allowed the library to not have to pay that back, would that not solve some of their financial concerns?
I would like to see how those costs are assigned to other units of the city. That's what I would like to see. Because I assume if the library didn't pay it, the other units of the city would. Yeah, because it's allocated around in, so, more information as to how the allocation is, what all the allocations are to everyone else, because someone's got to pay.
So that's exactly what I was going to mention, is there's probably a couple ways that in the event that we were to do something like that, there would be a couple of approaches we could take. One would be that revenue not coming into the general fund, then we would just find a corresponding decrease on the expense side. So we'd be going back to conversations about positions or other costs again. The alternative is the general fund doesn't lose revenue, but there's still a cost to recover, and that cost gets redistributed to the other funds that are paying, which would be like the utilities, for example. The electric utility, I think in every measure, because we have primarily 4 allocations. And I believe in all 4 cases, the electric utility is the #1 highest fund in terms of charges for allocations. So it would be an even larger amount for the utilities, so it would be a larger amount back on the ratepayers. So then you do get into more policy level questions of how much of that burden do you want to shift over onto ratepayers? How much do you want to be charged to other funds? The general fund itself pays allocations out as well to the IT fund and to the facilities maintenance fund. So these allocations are happening across virtually every fund of the city. And I know that during the preparation for the 24 budget, I think we allocated for the library based on 16 head count. So they have a little over 8 FTEs, but when you factor in temporary, part-time, seasonals like we do for all of the funds, they're at 16. I think at last count, based on our records, it should be more like 20. And then I know as far as the kind of the admin allocation goes, the way that methodology works, there was actually already, just because we knew that there were fiscal challenges for them on the horizon. They and the solid waste fund were the 2 funds that actually have received some assistance on those allocations already. The other funds have not.
I mean, we're assessing overhead even to the bid board, $2,500 if my numbers are right, to the bid board to administer the collection and distribution of the tax that we collect and so on. I mean, everybody's getting an allocation. We can't pick and choose who gets what we can't go up or down, because we can move the shells around as much as we want. It still comes down to the same thing. Somebody's either going to lose some revenue or going to have to pay a higher allocation, which results in less money spent.
Or we will reduce the expense. I mean, this is not a profit center for the general fund. The costs that are being allocated are costs that we're incurring for the services that are being provided. So if the library, which has been offered, if the library doesn't want any of those services, they want to go on their own, we would make corresponding reductions in our expenditures, because we're experiencing those costs to support the library. We are supporting the library in ways that are, I think, greater than or equal to other peer libraries that are being surveyed. I mean, we allocate because we do more. And I'm pretty sure the data is going to bear that out, but we also levy more, and we're way above the minimum, which seems kind of pathetic, right? I'm not proposing that we go to the statewide minimum to be, but we're in pretty good shape on measures as far as support of the library. But it is really, this is not the passive aggressive. It's a policy decision. It's not an easy one. So it's not about cutting anybody. It's about we allocate everything we got every year for levy. It all goes out and gets, out to different departments. So it's a matter of what you want to do for distribution. And it is a little more challenging because I, as your representative, are not empowered to make decisions about spending at the library that I think would make the decision better, make the situation better. That's the way it is. So that's why we always are worried. That's the only reason the library is separate on this pie chart, is because it's a separate allocation of levy. If they were part of the general fund, you would have we would be trying to figure out how to make the 74 or 84% work across the whole thing, and then you kind of get this big thing in your lap. But you can pull anything you want out, and you can also, I guess the invitation would be, we've got a couple things from Councilmember Downing and Councilmember Odine for information that'd be helpful, but then you can, and I guess Councilmember Morissette asked for the pie, setup. So we got 3 things that we can provide you to help you with the information. The fiscal plan increases the support. We got 900,000. We go up to 900,000, which was intended to try to cover a good portion of the comp and class for the full-time librarians. We've also held the line on the allocation, right? So we're reducing these FTE, and then it's having a flow effect through the fiscal plan, not just in 24, but it'll flow going forward. So you try to get the base either lowered or flattened, and then try to keep it that way going forward. And then you're also going to have, probably personnel expenses have to be adjusted $100,000 somewhere in the 5-year fiscal plan for the library in order to make this thing work. And that's, again, if you make that policy decision and say, this is what we're sending you, they still don't have to do that. They can decide there's something else to do. But there is a point certain where the library fund runs out of money, right? We're not supposed to be loaning the library fund other than cash flow purposes for payroll and stuff. We don't want to get in a situation where we're loaning 50 or 100,000 each year to try to make up the deficit. So that's kind of where we're at with that. So it sounds like you want some breakdown departments, some understanding of what this pie chart looks like, the cost assignment methodology, which we've talked about before, and have it readily available. So
I would be interested because, just like you said, we can't mandate back in the sense that we allocate the resources, but then operations are there. I'd be interested in innovations if they exist, because just like we can't mandate them, as council, with power of the purse, I do think it's responsible for us to understand what are some things the library isn't doing that they could be doing.
yeah,
Because I very much want to be clear on this. Maybe we've asked extra of you tonight, and that's maybe not a usual course for us entirely. That does not mean that what we're getting from the library is accepted. Carte blanche without any challenges from outside. That's certainly not my perspective.
Yeah,
But it's trying to challenge.
I'll go on a limb and make a generalization. I don't believe that is not what I think lacks here. I think the library board has done a very good job with the resources they have. I don't think it's a lack of innovation or some, problem with management or issue. I don't have a list of, hey, if you just do these 7 steps, everything's fine. It's how many hours do you want the library to be open, the building to be open? When it's open, what does the staffing look like? What is the service people can expect? That's where this discussion really is at, as far as my observation. It's like, are there 3 people in the library to help people, or are there 2? Are there 3 people for 70% of the hours and 2 people for 30% of the hours? Does it, certain hours you need 4 people? What are the qualifications of the people? How do you deal with it? And then even if you came up with an ideal situation, or everybody's different ideal situation, then you have real people working there and you have real impacts. So it's not just a matter of moving people around on board. You have to figure out how to make it work and fit the culture of the city, which is we usually just don't go in and lay people off because it's not the perfect setup. We try to work to an aim over time.
And you gotta get them to buy into it.
And I guess, Nick, I challenge that a little bit because the statute that establishes the library puts that charge on the library board to do that. And if we start delving in and saying, well, geez, you should pull this lever here, that lever here, I don't think that's, first of all, I don't think that's in the spirit of what the ordinance says or the state statute says. And number 2, I don't even know if we can do that or should be doing. I'm not sure that's an avenue we should go down. I think it's good to hear and understand so we can make our decision. But at the end of the day, here's your pile of money, library. You guys decide how to spend it. We have to appoint, the mayor has to appoint, we have to confirm his appointments, people who I'm not saying we don't already have that, but we have to put those people in place with the knowledge that they're making a decision based on the structure that's in place, similar to the housing authority.
And I think the library's done a good job of letting us know, at least since I've been mayor and probably a good 10 years before that, that whatever information we do give them or suggestions, they don't listen to. They've made it a pretty good policy of not listening to the city. It's trying to help them along with their financial issues. So that's why I have a real hard time wanting to give them more money, because I think you're just giving them more money for them to not spend the way they should. It's hard to explain, but for 12 years I've been mayor, they haven't listened to anything our financial directors have told them. Scott's had numerous meetings, suggestions, do it different. This has been coming for 15 years. They know it, we know it. They've done nothing about it. They don't listen to us. They don't take any suggestions from our staff. Now all of a sudden they're at the edge and it's like, oh my God, look what you guys did to us. And it's our fault. So I have a real hard time trying to just dump more money at the problem. Because it's a problem because they don't listen. Now, don't get me wrong, they've done a really good job over the last 3 or 4 years of realizing that, oh, well, we've gotten to the point now, we have to start making cuts. They've been doing a good job with that, but they still have a long ways to go. So it's tough thinking just dumping more money onto them is going to fix their issue, their core issues. But that's just me. And I know we got to go.
So how many more slides did you have? 10, 20?
Oh,
Just like, so
Send us the
should
PowerPoint.
we schedule workshop 3 for fiscal plan?
So, I guess it's up to you.
I'm okay with you and then in our one-on-ones.
You get the feedback you wanted, that's.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess, Josh, did you?
I think unless I hear otherwise,
We covered the 3 major assumptions. We've kind of walled ourselves in what we can afford.
Yeah.
Now it's how you want to spend it. Now we know what the budget is. We got to decide what you want to spend it on. Okay, and then we will consider ways to get you enough information or do a joint workshop with the library board or something that we can try to figure out what we're doing with that. That'll be up to you guys all. So Mayor, you want to adjourn this meeting?
Oh, yeah, we are good.
Second.
Thank you.